need to do, I invite you to breathe deeply. Let's slow down for a minute and enter into a spirit of meditation and prayer while I read our opening words. Spirit of life, you speak to us from the east and the west. You speak to us from the north and the south. You call us from the depths of our being. We respond with enthusiasm and fervor. We cry out from Manila to Maui. We shout from Alaska to Alabama. We proclaim your wondrous love from the highest mountain to the deepest ocean. Our voices must be heard. We shall not be silent. Our voices must be heard. And now I would ask Liz Loos to come up and light our chalice if she'd be willing. And the chalice is the symbol of the spark of life in each of us. People usually consider walking on water or in thin air a miracle. But I think the real miracle is to walk on earth. Every day we are engaged in a miracle, which we don't even recognize. A blue sky, white clouds, green leaves, the black curious eyes of a child, our own two eyes. All is a miracle. At this time, I would like to introduce our program. Tone-Lise Stenslie is the owner of Enjoy BodyTalk and is a holistic healthcare practitioner. I find her, even though I've only met her briefly, to be a calming presence, and she has a beautiful accent as well. So I think you're going to enjoy listening to both her content and how it's presented. So please help me welcome Tone-Lise.
Good morning. So in this brief presentation, I'm going to talk about 3 ideas. And the first one is that a shift in our consciousness can affect our health. And I'm talking about a shift in our state of mind, in our awareness. Second one is that every part of our body has a consciousness. Every cell, every organ, every system has a knowing about what it's supposed to do, or they're supposed to do. We have some 50 trillion cells, so it gets to be a lot. And the third idea is that we can speed up the healing process by learning to tune into our inner wisdom, to our innate wisdom. So let me start with the first one, that a shift in our consciousness can affect our health and well-being. And I'm going to share a story that happened to me. And this, in hindsight, this was really my introduction to what I call consciousness-based healing. And it happened 30 years ago. And I was working in Bergen as a salesperson for a personal growth company. So part of the training was to attend and trying to apply what we learned, what we were promoting. And during it was a 5-day intense class, I had an aha. And we did a lot of introspective exercises where we trained ourselves to tune into our inner wisdom, in a sense, or our intuition. And before I get into the aha I had, or ahas, I love ahas, I have to give you a background story about myself. So at this point, I was fairly healthy. But I had one major health issue. And before I even get to that, I was quite a tomboy. I have 2 older brothers that I always tried to keep up with. And I was very much into sports, and I wanted to be as good as them. And if I could beat guys in sport, that was the pinnacle of my joy at that time. And so at this time, my major health issue was related to a dysfunction in my reproductive system. I had something called amenorrhea, which means that you don't have your period. It wouldn't, after having it regular for a bit, it just ceased to be. And this condition had existed in my body for nearly 10 years. And I had gone to a couple of doctors and a gynecologist, and they had found nothing wrong with me. And I wasn't over-exercising, I wasn't under-eating, I wasn't under a tremendous amount of stress. So it was a little bit of a mystery. So what they said today is just take these hormone pills and get it started once in a while. And I'm not keen on taking stuff, medicine, or chemicals. So I did it for a year, and then I kind of, it is what it is. So back to my aha. What I realized in that exercise is that I had a deep desire to be strong that I hadn't really even looked at. And nothing wrong with being strong, but the problem I got into is that I realized I had looked at women as weak, or at least weaker than men. So, in a sense, there was an issue because, oh my golly, I'm a woman. I want to be strong, and I associate strength with men. So, what I also realized is that women have their own beautiful strength. Maybe not as much muscle mass as men, but we have our own strength. And at that moment, in hindsight, I consciously welcomed being a woman. So I was pretty excited. I had this aha, and my mind is expanding, and I figured this is a good thing. It makes me a more balanced person. And I didn't really expect anything else to change after that. So a couple of weeks after this class, I got my period back. And it stayed regular ever since until I became pregnant with the first of my 3 children. So that was my introduction to how a state, a change in the way I looked at myself and the world, in a sense, had a direct impact on my physical health and my emotional and mental well-being, you could say as well. So, and I want to quote, and I want to add one thing. We often sabotage ourselves unknowingly. Sometimes knowingly, like with addictions, we may admit, okay, this is causing me problems, but I'm not willing to deal with it. But often, we're not even aware of it. So a big part of healing is simply becoming aware. And I'm going to quote Deepak Chopra. Anybody heard of Deepak Chopra? Yes, so he's the one who writes a ton of books, and he's an expert in neuroendocrinology, which means he's an expert in the chemicals that are secreted by or produced by our nervous system, like serotonin, dopamine, the feel-good ones, the calming ones, endorphins, and other ones. So what he says, there's no mental event that does not correlate with the nervous system, that does not correlate. So he says it's kind of difficult. He says there's no mental event that does not have a neural correlate, and there's no neural event without a biological correlate. So just to make my quote precise here. But what it means that there's nothing that when you have anything happen in your mind, anything that affects your mind, it is also going to affect your nervous system. And anything that affects your nervous system is also going to affect your body, your living organism, your biology. And we often forget this. So I'm going to move on to my second idea. Every part of our body has a knowing, has a consciousness. Have you ever wondered why your liver cells know how to be liver cells? You know, they're part of this amazing organ that does some 500 tasks for your body. And we can take the immune system. Think about how smart your immune system is. In general, sometimes it gets messed up. Sometimes we get confused and our body parts get confused. But your immune system has the ability to remember. Let's say you had chicken pox at 5. And you go through it, and it's horrible, and you're sick, but you survive it. And your immune system remembers, okay, I need to produce that antibody to keep in check that specific virus. So our immune system is a great way to think of how a part of our body really has a consciousness and knowing. Now, I'm going to move on to the third idea in my talk, and that is that we can speed up the healing process by becoming better at listening. By becoming better at listening to our inner wisdom. So what do I mean with that? Listening to your inner wisdom. You can call it your inner intelligence. You could call it, some people may call it your intuition. If you want to use a spiritual language, even your higher self. We have a force inside us that always strives for balance, for health. If we take the time and learn the skills to listen. So one of the suggestions I have, and in your mindfulness series, you may have talked about this, practicing becoming a neutral observer to yourself. Are you familiar with that idea? Some of you are. So what do I mean with that? What often gets us in trouble is that, let's say you have an emotion. Let's say you're feeling depressed. And on top of that, and maybe you have some stressful thoughts around that. I'm stupid, or I'm not enough, or, why can't I get my act together? So what we do, first we judge how we're feeling. And so we get stuck in that emotion. And then we become totally identified with the thought we have or the emotion we have. So there's no space. So when I'm saying practice being a neutral observer, is take a step back. Practice that. And oh my golly, here I have this rather stressful thought that I don't have time. I don't have time. How is that making my body feel? I feel a little tension in my chest area, or wherever you may feel it. And just instead of trying to solve everything with the head, bring yourself down and listen to your body. And then there's a zillion things you can do from there. But, in a short talk, I can't cover a lot. So I'm going to share very quickly, as a BodyTalk practitioner, which really is a consciousness-based modality that draws on a lot of other healing modalities, what I use. And I've done this for about 12 years now. I tune into other people's bodies, is really what I do. Other people's body-mind, because we're much more than a body, and their energy. I should add body-mind-spirit. So, first I set an intention. You might have heard of the power of intention. Our intention impacts us. So when I'm with a person, my intention is, what's the priority issue? Because usually for most of us, we're messed up in several areas. So, what do we start with? And that could take me to a physical issue, a mental issue, an emotional issue, or a spiritual issue, or an environmental issue, or an ancestral issue. Unfortunately, sometimes we have to deal with things passed down through our ancestral line. Or maybe I should say fortunately. It's up to us to heal kind of a vicious cycle, or a cycle of some type. The other thing I do is I use neuromuscular feedback. Is anybody familiar with, this muscle checking? No, I don't do that. But I have a way I can tune into your body that I can hold a lot of mental questions, ask yes and no questions, and I can check on your wrist to see if I'm on the right track. And sometimes I will ask who I'm working with to tell a little story about maybe they've had a trauma, and maybe there's a specific aspect of that trauma we need to address. And then I have simple techniques that we can highlight the priority to your nervous system, to your mind and nervous system. And lastly, I used simple balancing techniques to really jumpstart your own natural ability to heal. So my role is more as a catalyst. So now, explaining more of that would take a whole talk in itself, so I'm going to move to the theme of Thanksgiving, since we are approaching that, and it's also relevant to what I'm speaking about. And this is a suggestion that I have to all of you, and I'm sure some of you are familiar with this. You touched on it. To practice gratitude, to practice appreciation. there's an institute called the Heart Math Institute that have done research in when we practice appreciation and have sustained feelings of gratitude, it affects us. I mean, you know, there's not too long, it's not too far, when we feel grateful, it's also a close relative to feeling joy and happiness. But from just a body perspective, in terms of the state of our mind, the quality of a consciousness affecting our health, here are 3 things that it actually does physically. It can help improve hormonal balance. Secondly, it can boost your immune system. They have found that sustained feelings of gratitude increases the production of an antibody. Antibodies are the guys that fight the viruses and bacteria. And lastly, it has it greatly impacts your emotional well-being. And some of you may have heard of the expression, what fires together, wires together. Anybody familiar with that? So this gets into neuroplasticity, the brain's ability to change itself, your nervous system. So what it is, the more you think about something, that you create a neural pathway. Let's say in your earlier life you did a lot of complaining about everything, you know, and especially about your body. So it becomes easier and easier and easier to go into that mode of complaining. So in the beginning, this path of gratitude may be like an overgrown pathway, yeah? And the more you practice it, it starts changing your brain. It starts literally changing your brain. So this is very exciting. So it's a simple practice. The other thing, again, just taking time out and tune in to how you're feeling, instead of immediately start labeling it and judging it. So, I want to quote Meister Eckhart, who said, if the only prayer you ever say in your life is thank you, that will be enough. And in conclusion, I like to say, because I know this is an activist church, which is wonderful, that there's no social transformation without personal transformation. And to me, consciousness-based medicine is ultimately about personal transformation. Thank you.
Thank you. I thought that your talk was very interesting. And I had a question. You were talking about depression and anxiety and how changing your perspective can help with that, and taking a step back and looking at your thoughts. What if you don't know what the thought is that's causing it, if you know what I mean? Like, that's what I struggle with, is not knowing why I have it, but being able to know that I do have it is a big step.
Yes, it's an excellent question. And keep in mind, it took me 10 years, almost 10 years to have my aha. So had I known what I know now, I'm a tool collector, so there's a lot of ways. And part of what this is part of what I help people with, because sometimes it's really hard. We have a lot of blind spots. And sometimes it's really hard to know what is driving our depression or sadness or anger or stress. And sometimes it's helpful to have somebody from the outside, because trying to do it ourselves can be challenging. So, first acknowledging that. And the second, there are different tools you can take. And I know you guys have started practicing meditations, and simply giving your, do you meditate at all? Which is hard. That in itself is hard. I started calling it my sitting practice. So I thought, you know, okay, I'm just going to sit in the spot for 10 minutes, and whatever happens. And sometimes what I've come to see is that healing is very much about healing patterns we get stuck in. And sometimes we do get really stuck. And I use different modalities can also be healing, be helpful. But I'm just thinking, trust where you feel guided as you learn about this. Because it is helpful to have somebody with you. And it could be a book. It could be a health practitioner. It could be regular counseling. But most often, there's an underlying trauma. Often, there's underlying traumas that have not been addressed and that we still store in our body. And sometimes, it is even not our stuff. It's our parents' stuff or our grandparents' stuff that really is surfacing to come up for healing. So there's so many possible contributions to why we're stuck. Is that helpful at all? Yeah. Okay.
So I have a friend in Minneapolis called Kristen Wernicke, and she's written a book called, I think it's Healing Conscious Self or something like that, but it's very much what you talk about, how you can heal your body through your mind, really, and through energy work. So you do energy work, I understand,
Yes.
is what you do? Yeah.
In addition, that's part of what I do. Mm-hmm. And sometimes we can have stuck or blocked energy. So simply helping to bring the flow back in your energy meridians and your chakras and other part of your energy body can be very helpful. It's not all I do, but that can often be a very important part.
Well, I look forward to talking to you more.
And one thing I often give homework to my clients because that really helps speeding up the process. And I'm going to jump back to depression just to throw that out. There are quite convincing research that simply starting exercising starts changing your brain chemical. And there's actually research where they had their control group, an exercise group, and one group who went on medication, all suffering from depression. And the group that actually did best was those who exercised. So don't underestimate being physically active, even though it's sometimes hard to start.
I was curious about, you talked a little bit about ancestral different things. Could you just expand on that a little bit? That's something in my family that we've talked about. My mother's family, other than her father, all died in the Holocaust. And just talking about how, like trauma, family trauma, ancestral trauma can affect people down the road.
And what is wonderful, there's more and more research to really verify that. We are passing down more than simply our genes for physical traits. And I want to throw out that your genes are not deterministic, apart from maybe a few percentage. Anybody familiar with epigenetics? Yeah, so there are genetic markers that get turned on and off, depending on lifestyle, environments, different triggers. So in terms of the ancestral patterns, what they found that patterns, trauma that your grandparents experienced can actually affect your body, mind, spirit now. There's and you can even think also fetal life. As if your mother or even your father goes through tremendous stress when you're in the womb, that can affect you. And it's easy to understand with the mother because your mother secretes stress hormones that then affects the fetus. So ancestral line with Holocaust victim, they have found that especially sometimes it seems to jump a generation often, but the grandparents sometimes have to deal with traumas that really started with their grandparents. So, and there are more research on it. And the good news is we can work on it and break the cycle. So sometimes if you think you're a total mess and it's all you, often it's not. We are all interconnected. We cannot not be connected. So even asking if you're feeling really angry, really sad, really depressed, just asking, is this mine? Is this my stuff? Because part of it could be you have picked it up and carrying it in your body. Is that helpful? Yeah. Okay.
This is kind of a follow-up. I've been really interested in this myself, looking at my family history in that, I know that some of the behaviors and problems with depression that my dad had came from his dad, who was not a happy man at all, but he had conflict with his father. So this is my great-grandfather, and so I could see how that sort of a, one man was maybe just a hard man, and another man was abusive, and then fortunately my dad did a lot to turn that around, and he was not abusive at all. He was a very kind man, but he definitely made choices that were exactly the opposite of what his family had done. In some ways, maybe even going too far to the other side to counteract it. But it's very fast. And then that's just the people that were in America. Going back to Germany, I have no idea what they experienced. But it seems to me that part of my family has been traced back to about the 1500s in Eastern Europe. And I'm sure you can check each generation and see, hardships that happened. And it's no wonder us Northern Europeans are depressed. So anyway, I think it's just fascinating, and I really appreciated all your words this morning. And yeah, thank you.
Thank you.
Our closing words. Sit down wherever you are and listen to the wind singing in your veins. Feel the love, the longing, the fear in your bones. Open your heart to who you are right now. Not who you would like to be, not the saint you are striving to become, but the being right here before you, inside you, around you. All of you is holy. You are already more and less than whatever you can know. Breathe out, look in, let go.